to welcome you to this evening's program at the Institute of Politics. It's a great privilege to be able to introduce to you our distinguished speaker this evening, Representative Stephen Chun, who is head of the Taiwan Economic and Cultural Representative Office in Washington, D.C. And it's a great honor for us to have him here with us today. He has a very distinguished background, which I will briefly describe for you. He has 2 degrees from Santo Tomas University. He's a great student of history, politics, literature. Just today he was reminding many of us about elements of Massachusetts and American history that escaped our knowledge. He's served his country in many different postings in the Philippines, Brazil, Argentina, across the United States, Atlanta, Los Angeles, Chicago, Washington. He's been Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs. He's worked as Deputy Secretary General of the President's Office of the Republic of China. He's headed important divisions in the Foreign Ministry to do with treaties in international law and international organizations. And since 1997, he has been the representative of his government in Washington, D.C. So it's a great privilege to welcome him here today.
It is indeed a pleasure and honor to be invited to talk to this distinguished audience in this world-famous university. Now I can tell my grandchildren that I've been to Harvard. Although it will be too late to tell my children because they're all grown. In my 45 years of foreign service, I have, of course, talked to a lot of groups, and I've accumulated 15 years of service in this country. So I know in an American setting, the speaker is almost obligated to tell a couple of jokes before you start the text. I already talked my most favorite joke yesterday, so I'm not going to repeat that, of course. So in this audience, I think most of you are married, some are about to get married, some of you are bachelors, I know that. So from a man who has stayed married to a woman, same woman, for 43 years, I think I ought to give you or share with you the secret of happy marriage. It's very simple. You don't have to take notes. My advice for those who have not married or have just married is to enter into an agreement with your spouse. Now you say that for important matters, the husband will be the one who decides. It sounds chauvinistic, but wait, okay? And then for ordinary matters, not unimportant matters, the wife will be the one who decides. I don't think the girls will like that, but wait. But whether a matter is important or not important, the wife will be the one who decides. So you have so you will have a happy marriage. Another one, also my favorite, is a speaker talking to an all-man group, a stag party of about 100 people. He said, I have heard stories about hand-packed husbands, but in confronting individuals, nobody admits he's hand-packed. So today, I'm going to find out once for all. So those who admit they're hand-packed, please stand on this side of the room. Those who do not admit, those who they are not hand-packed, stand on this side. Well, then 99 out of 100 finally admitted that they were hand-packed. So they sat on this side. Only one guy stood on this side. So he addressed this single man and he said, "Are you going to tell me you are the only one who is not henpecked?" "No, sir." "Then you stand on the wrong side." "Well, my wife has always told me to avoid all crowds." That's not very funny. I'm indeed honored by your invitation to appear here today to discuss recent developments and the future challenges affecting the Republic of China on Taiwan. And I want to thank you for your invitation and for the courtesy and hospitality you are extending me today. With respect to the Republic of China on Taiwan, I can tell you that the basic purpose of our people and government is really quite simple: to successfully sustain the first democratic Chinese society in 5,000 years of history, providing freedom and prosperity for our citizens, and also serving as a role model for the rest of China, especially the communist mainland. In actual fact, we are a sovereign state with an elected government that cherishes peace and freedom, that respects democracy, and that strives for fairness and justice for all its people. Barely 1 decade ago, my government launched the historic initiative to accelerate national democratic reform for the 22 million people living on Taiwan. This sweeping democratic transition has touched every part of our society and has changed the way of life of our citizens. Most important is that given the ROC clear moral authority as a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Today, our national policy is thoroughly debated and crafted through constitutional parliamentary processes, much like those in the United States. Freely elected legislators and national assemblymen voice the concerns of the constituents and demand accountability from administration officials. As a part of this process, special interest groups promote their respective agendas, while private citizens rally for causes and the candidates, petition the government, vote, and amplify their views through various media channels, including talk radio and newspaper editorials. We believe our experience sets a good example for other developing countries that wish to modernize without upsetting their fundamental social order and stability. Fortunately, Taiwan's economy remains relatively strong and stable in the midst of East Asia's current widespread financial crisis. Despite the general regional economic decline, my government anticipates a growth rate of perhaps 5.2% this year, somewhat lower than last year, which was 6.7%, but still quite respectable by regional and global standards. Some of our less fortunate neighbors actually are experiencing negative rates of growth in 1998. The ROC's gross national product surpasses $285 billion with per capita GNP at approximately $12,300, one of the highest levels in Asia. At present, the ROC is the 15th largest trading nation in the world, with total volume exceeding $236 billion, and the 7th largest overseas investor. We remain hopeful of sustaining our economic vitality well into the next century. The Asian financial crisis has had less severe impact upon Taiwan, in part because we always have striven to manage our economy prudently. We've maintained a low rate of inflation. We're virtually foreign debt free, and we have maintained a persistent surplus in our current account. Moreover, Taiwan has one of the highest volumes of foreign exchange reserve in the world. Our national financial institutions are basically healthy, and our major enterprises, the small and medium-sized enterprises, have been very adaptable to changing economic conditions over time. To deal with difficult future challenges generated by the crisis in our neighborhood, my government intends to follow a cautious macroeconomic policy, including sound financial supervision, in order to nurture continuing growth and the inflow of foreign capital. We will devote even higher priority to economic liberalization, financial efficiency, and respect for the rules of market economics. And we will make every effort to actively participate in international aid programs for other Asian nations. One very obvious effect arising from the region's present financial crisis is the need for closer consultations, coordination, and cooperation between all the Asian Pacific economies. The reality of our common interdependence is indisputable. That's why Taiwan is trying to fulfill its responsibilities as a constructive, contributing regional partner. Beginning this year, our central bank has allocated a total of $1 billion to the branches of commercial banks in Southeast Asia to aid the business community there. In addition, a total of $230 million has been contributed by our commercial banks to the co-financing program of the Asian Development Bank and the syndicate loans of renowned international banks. Furthermore, the ROC has mobilized both our public and private sectors to expand trade and investment in the region. As of June this year, our direct investments in Asia reached $58 billion. All this reflects our conviction that the region's financial recovery requires international cooperation irrespective of political boundaries and differences. The ROC can be a valuable part of the recovery effort. A good example for others is the close bilateral cooperation today between the peoples of Taiwan, the Republic of China, and the United States. This historically close relationship remains very broad and durable, 20 years after the break in formal diplomatic ties. In fact, I believe the spirit of cooperation and friendship has intensified over time to our mutual benefit. Overall, it is a very practical partnership that befits the special affinity between Americans and Chinese. The American-Taiwan Relations Act remains a solid legal foundation and the framework for the wide spectrum of interaction between us. Educational and cultural exchanges, for example, are continually expanding. You probably are aware that more than 30,000 students from Taiwan now study in this country. In fact, the ROC ranks 5th in size among all nations who send their students to the US to learn. We are reassured that under the terms of the Act, the United States still considers any threat to Taiwan's security to be a matter of grave concern that can jeopardize the peace and stability of the Pacific region. The sale of defensive weapons and services to Taiwan helps preserve regional peace both now and for the future. Long-time commercial links between the US and Taiwan continue to grow each year. There's a climate of healthy vitality and momentum that contributes to our mutual prosperity. In fact, since diplomatic ties were severed, ROC-US trade has never declined. There has been steady growth in annual trade from $7 billion in 1978 to nearly $53 billion last year. To date, the U.S. remains our single largest commercial partner, and fully 1/5 of our total trade flows to and from the U.S. At the present time, Taiwan remains America's 7th largest export market in the world, with over $23 billion in U.S. goods purchased annually by our consumers. This averages out to $64 million in sales per day. Yes, per day. It is worth noting that although the population in the Taiwan area is 50 times smaller than that of mainland China, we import far more American goods than the mainland every year. And we expect that our expanding liberalization measures, including tariff reductions, will boost American competitiveness in exporting high-quality products to Taiwan in the years to come. The state of Massachusetts alone exports almost $700 million worth of industrial goods to Taiwan every year, according to the most recent data available. Much of this is industrial machinery and electronic products, including computer equipment. Just as important, our private entrepreneurs invest in over 200 companies in the New England area, dealing in computers, parts and services, as well as in finance, construction and shipment services at a level of around $100 million. Meanwhile, the U.S. is the second largest overseas investor in Taiwan's economy, with some $4.6 billion flowing into Taiwan from the U.S. between 1986 and 1996. That represented 26% of all our inward foreign direct investment. In fact, some 45 Massachusetts companies have invested in Taiwan, including Digital Equipment Corporation, which has a branch factory in Taoyuan, and companies like Raytheon. Obviously, my government places great emphasis on maintaining this mutually beneficial commercial relationship with the U.S., and for good reason. So do the American people. Analysts estimate the total value of our commercial transactions with the United States, including trade, investment, foreign study, and tourism, provide some 800,000 new job opportunities in the U.S. each year. Now, I will turn briefly to two important challenges facing Taiwan today. First, cross-trade relations with mainland China, and second, our pragmatic diplomatic outreach to the international community. Let me assure you that my government is committed to the eventual unification of Taiwan and the Chinese mainland under the principles of democracy, freedom, and equitable prosperity. Practically speaking, the major hurdle to greater interaction and reunification between us is the major difference between the political systems and the ways of life of the two sides. Only by layering such differences can the two sides move forward naturally. The ROC government has been consistent in its mainland policy, with a strong desire to construct peaceful and stable cross-strait relations through exchanges and reciprocity. We have always believed that by promoting mutual understanding and building mutual trust, we can create a positive and objective environment for national reunification. This is why we work hard for the resumption of direct dialogue with the mainland through non-official counterpart organizations, a dialogue which was suspended in 1995 by the Beijing authorities. For 3 years, we repeatedly emphasized that the door to negotiations remained open. Finally, this month, an official dialogue resumed in Shanghai and Beijing between our Straits Exchange Foundation Chairman C.F. Koo and Wang Daohan, President of Mainland Association for Relations Across Taiwan Straits, or ARAS. During his visit, Mr. Koo also engaged in a frank and tolerant exchange of views with several top government leaders, including the Mainland President and Deputy Premier. Although these meetings proved very constructive, there were differences of opinion and controversies, of course. Clearly, there still is a lack of trust and a certain degree of animosity to be overcome. However, the two sides did reach certain common understandings. They agreed to resume dialogue on political, economic, and other matters, to enforce bilateral exchanges at various levels, and to strengthen cooperation in incidents involving the personal safety and the property of people visiting across Taiwan Straits. At Mr. Koo's invitation, Mr. Wang Daohan, the president of the ARAS, also agreed to visit Taiwan at an appropriate time. This very welcome resumption of institutionalized dialogue paves the way for future constructive consultations. It is a starting point for increasing positive interaction between the two sides and for re-establishing mutual credibility. Moreover, it fulfills the international community's high expectation for resumption of cross-strait dialogue while helping to ameliorate tensions in the region. Since 1991, the ROC has adhered to a staged process defined by official guidelines for national unification. In the near term, we maintain that cross-strait trade and economic integration should be expedited, contributing to mutual trust. In the longer term, it will be necessary for both sides to be able to negotiate China's reunification on an equal footing. Otherwise, the loss of international standing for us would only lead to pressures for Taiwan independence movement, thereby adding to tensions across strait, which work to no one's interest. Meanwhile, private sector exchanges between Taiwan and the mainland have helped to narrow the gap between us over the last decade. Since 1987, more than 12 million visits and 100 million letters and telephone calls have been exchanged between Taiwan and the mainland. News coverage and other forms of cultural and educational contact also have expanded. Trade volume between the two sides has grown as well, reaching $26.4 billion last year. The biggest portion of this is our exports of industrial raw materials and components to the mainland. But our imports of mainland herbal medicines, cotton, fur, and polyester are rising. Meanwhile, entrepreneurs from Taiwan have agreed to invest more than $38 billion on the Chinese mainland, making us the second largest source of outside investment there. We treat cross-strait commercial relations strictly in accordance with market principles rather than political factors. Nevertheless, these exchanges alone have not generated enough mutual understanding, goodwill, and trust between the two sides. That is why the dialogue process is so important. The People's Republic of China on the mainland still considers Taiwan to be, quote-unquote, a renegade province. Even though Taiwan never has been part of PRC, even though the communists have never ruled Taiwan for even a single day, Beijing backs up its claim with a threat to use force against Taiwan, a threat which it still refuses to renounce. We are compelled by the necessity of survival to put national security ahead of trade investment on our list of priorities. Therefore, while China's unification remains Taipei's policy and political objective, it cannot be achieved overnight. We have no timetable. The time for unification will come whenever mainland China attains democracy, freedom, and social justice. Until it is possible, we hope that mainland China will come to understand better the ROC's general political and social situation and accept it as a model, or at least as a helping hand. Hopefully, the mainland will carry out reforms so that the two sides can be reunited gradually. Meanwhile, it is important for the rest of the world to understand that Taiwan is a vital link and has a very valuable role to play in the process of peace and prosperity across the Taiwan Straits. It also has a legitimate and valuable place within the international community generally. With a remarkable level of economic and political progress to their credit in recent years, the people on Taiwan want to become more active participants in regional and global affairs. This is a necessity if we are to survive as a free people. Today, Taiwan engages in an enormous variety of commercial and cultural activities with more than 140 countries and territories worldwide. Our regional role is particularly strong and still growing. Taiwan is now one of the largest sources of external investment in Vietnam, mainland China, and Malaysia, to name a few, and among the largest in the world in overall long-term capital outflow. Consistent with this, my government is continuing its policy of pragmatic diplomacy abroad, which is meant to be neither confrontational or antagonistic. In fact, it benefits the common welfare even as it reinforces our own survival and development. We believe that our exercise of pragmatic diplomacy is a necessary step in the overall process of reunifying the entire Chinese nation. After all, joint participation in international activities can create opportunities for Taipei and Beijing to meet and interact, thereby enhancing our understanding of each other. In short, all those who admire our democracy and successful economy should talk with us and work with us in a pragmatic fashion. This is the basis and the central message of our drive for international contact and participation. This will remain a core objective and challenge to our people in the years ahead. Therefore, we are grateful to the United States and its people here for their steadfast support for Taiwan's democracy, security, and freedom to participate in international community. Despite the lack of formal diplomatic ties between our two governments, Congress and American people have consistently expressed support for and friendship towards us. We place great importance on the many economic, cultural, and other relations between our two nations. We encourage all of our friends here to work actively to preserve the strong bilateral ties that exist in so many areas. With broad public support, we are confident that our two democratic nations, will be brought even closer together. The result is sure to be beneficial for international peace and understanding, and for China's eventual unification and freedom and democracy. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Representative Chun. Representative Chun has agreed to take questions. We'd ask people to please come to one of the two microphones and introduce yourselves briefly, name and affiliation, and to try to keep the questions to the form of questions. Please.
Hi, my name is George Han, and I am the Educational Cultural Chair of the Taiwanese Cultural Society at Harvard University. My question is, much of your speech was dedicated to saying that Taiwan is a free democratic society and it is successful economically. So my question is, why would you want to become a part of mainland China if Taiwan is so successful right now?
No. Well, there's a saying in Chinese that blood is thicker than water. We belong to the same nation, culturally, historically, and even geographically. Remember in 1945 when Taiwan was reverted to Chinese rule, to the Republic of China rule, when the government was in Nanjing. Did anybody in Taiwan say openly, publicly, that we are opposed to the reversion? Well, you are too young to know, of course. But ask your grandparents, nobody, because it was natural. So why so many people in Taiwan are opposed to reunification now under communism? The answer is because it is a communist government. So the logic will tell us we are opposed to communist rule, but we are not opposed to the eventual unification of the country under freedom and democracy.
I have something to add. You said that no one was opposed to the government back in the 1940s, but that was before the 228 incident, I believe.
Yes.
But I think after the 228 incident, which is basically thousands of Taiwanese people were killed by the government, and I think many Taiwanese after that point felt that they should be their own nation.
No, the question remains the same. Did anybody in 1945 say those things? So
But 1945 was before the incident.
People are not against the idea of eventual unification under freedom and democracy, but they were against the communist rule and against the government in 1947 when the incident of 228 happened. So I think it's logical. At least I studied the logic of St. Thomas Aquinas. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's take more questions, please.
My name is Jerry Kirby, and I'm with the Harvard Learning and Retirement Community. And I'm wondering, does Mr. Koo hold some position in the Nationalist Party? And if not, why was he chosen to lead the group in the discussions last week?
I didn't quite catch your question. Did you understand that?
I was wondering about Mr. Koo.
Oh.
Whether he held a position going on.
Okay. Oh, yes, he has he's a member of the Standing Committee of the Central Committee of Kuomintang. He's a businessman, a tycoon.
Yes.
But he is a member of the Standing Committee of the Central Committee of Kuomintang. And he also heads the Straits Exchange Foundation, which has been authorized by my government to deal with the mainland. Firstly, on matters of on functional and practical matters when it was first set up. And there is a counterpart organization on the mainland, also authorized by the PRC government. The organization is called ARATS, Association for the Relations Across the Taiwan Straits. So both sides designated so-called unofficial bodies to interact. So Mr. Koo went there as head of this organization, and not because he's a member of the Standing Committee of the Central Committee of the KMT.
I see.
He's a duly designated representative of my country.
I see. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let us invite other questions, please. Yes.
Hi, Mr. Chen. My name is Jim Sun. I'm a first-year student of Harvard Business School. I have a commercial question to ask you. As we know that last week, American government just received the accusation of a microcomputer to accuse that the dumping semiconductor products dumping of Taiwanese semiconductor companies. How do you think this will bring the negative impact on Taiwanese economics and also the relationship between Taiwan government and American government? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. This, of course, is a purely commercial dispute. And according to U.S. laws, there are channels to challenge the accusation and defend your position. And I don't think in the modern society, commercial disputes should affect the overall relationship. So don't worry. Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Katsu Kawa. I'm a graduate of Kennedy School and currently working at the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C. I have two quick questions. First question, as I have been reading the news articles or news media in the mainland China, they have been discussing about a new concept of economic security in which mainland Chinese authors claim that the PLC should enhance economic interdependence with Taiwan to integrate Taiwan's economy into mainland China as a part of important, significant strategy for the eventual reunification. It seems to me that Taiwan needs a really delicate balancing action to deepen our economic interdependence with mainland China, at the same time diversify its economic relations with other countries, in the world. What is your response to this mainland Chinese writers' viewpoint? And the second question is, as Jen Zamin, the PLC President Jen Zamin is going to visit Japan on November 25, and Japanese government have been under heavy pressure to refer verbally to the so-called 3-no policies. And there is a wider speculation that the new Japan Prime Minister make a compromise on this issue. What message would you like to convey to Japanese government prior to Jen Zamin's visit to Japan?
Thank you. Very sophisticated questions from a first-year student. Thank you. Our businessmen invest on the mainland out of commercial considerations because the land price is exorbitant now in Taiwan because the labor cost is cheaper on mainland. So they move some of the manufacturing facilities to the mainland in order to have more competitive products. As simple as that. And from the point of view of the government, we think it's a good thing. It's a good thing. Why? Because we are now trying to help through trading and investment and the cultural and the education exchanges and tourism to help in the peaceful transformation of the mainland from a communistic state economy into a more liberal market economy. Now, our presence on the mainland has a far greater impact than American and European presence. Now, the reason is also very simple. Because when the mainland Chinese people, our countrymen, see Europeans and Americans far more advanced, far more prosperous, the communist authorities in Beijing can easily explain the difference by telling the people, oh, these countries have an earlier industrialization, therefore they are more prosperous, more advanced. So all we have to do is to work harder and we will catch up. And the people accept this explanation. But when our people show up on mainland, then it's very difficult to explain. And people know the answer. The answer is the system. Remember, in 1949, when the country was first divided, the level of economic development on both sides of the Taiwan Strait was equal. Both poor, third poor. The per capita GNP was $50 on either side. But why, 49 years later, there's such disparity? Mainland has a per capita GNP of 850, some say 750, never mind. But we have 12,300. Now the answer is, of course, the system. So we encourage this interaction. But the government also has a caution for the big business. Do not invest in infrastructure projects yet. Do not invest in heavy industries yet. Why? Because the other side has not yet renounced use of force in the resolution of the Taiwan Strait issue. So we know that there are risks involved. So our people are also investing in other areas. And we know that it is a strategy of the PRC to attract more and more and more, if possible, all the money from Taiwan, then we will be forced to surrender. We're not that naive. Thank you very much for your question. Question number two relates to Japan's position on the 3 no's. Everybody is aware that President Clinton enunciated 3 no's in Shanghai. The 3 no's, for those who are not government students, who are not versed in international affairs, refers to not supporting Taiwan independence. Number 2, not supporting one China, one Taiwan, or 2 Chinas. Okay? We have no question about that. Our policy are the same. We do not support Taiwan independence. We don't support 2 Chinas or 1 China, 1 Taiwan. But we have reservations about the 3rd no, which is not supporting Taiwan's membership in international bodies that require statehood as membership, for membership. Now, but we have been assured and reassured by U.S. administration officials that the U.S. policy toward Taiwan has not changed. The U.S. military sales policy toward Taiwan has not changed. And the interests of the Republic of China on Taiwan have not been hurt as a result of the enunciation of 3 no's. So we would like to, our message for the Japanese government is do not repeat the same enunciation of 3 no's when Jiang Zemin visits Japan. That is our request and as our appeal. Thank you very much.
Good. Let's see if there are other questions.
There's a gentleman coming.
Please, sir. Yes.
Representative Chen, I'm Ed O'Connell from Winchester, Mass. And I'm a one-time Foreign Service officer for the United States Department of State and a former assistant dean of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. And I know that each year now there are significant numbers of citizens of the Republic of China on Taiwan who travel to mainland China. And I'm curious as to, is that travel being reciprocated by people from the People's Republic traveling to Taiwan? And as an add-on, because we are here at Harvard, I've got to make this an educational question. Is there any interchange of students at the university level? Are there students going from Taiwan to the mainland, and are there students from the mainland who come and do some studies in higher education within Taiwan? Thank you.
Thank you. And a salute to a senior member of the Foreign Service. The answer to both questions is yes. Of course, there are more people going to visit the mainland every year. The number is 1.5 million visits, not people, but some people go there 4 times, 5 times a year. 1.5 million visits a year. And at any given time, there are about 300,000 people from Taiwan either visiting or doing business or investing on the mainland. So the number is huge. That's why I said the impact, our impact is far greater than European and American impact. Now, the traffic from the other side, there are people coming from the other side, of course, but we have to place some restrictions because so many people would like to come. If we have no restrictions, I can guarantee you that the island would literally sink in a matter of weeks. No, truthfully. So now I think there are about 20,000 visitors every year. Okay. About students, yes, according to an unofficial estimate, because officially we don't allow students to go there to study, because they still teach communism in universities. But there are from 1,000 to 2,000 students studying in the various universities on the mainland. Why? Because we have a very tough, competitive joint entrance college exam in Taiwan. And we have tried to modernize it, revise it, improve it. But still, we can only accommodate 60% of all applicants through this exam. So what do the others do? They go abroad, study in other countries, or to the mainland to seek admission to their universities and colleges.
We thought they were all at MIT and Harvard.
From the other side, we would welcome some students from mainland, but as far as I know, no takers, because the authorities on the mainland wouldn't dare to expose their young students to our education. But there are some youngsters in elementary schools who came as dependents of our citizens. A few. Thank you very much for your question.
Representative Chun, I'm Steve Schenkel. I'm a second-year MPP student here at the Kennedy School. And you've spoken eloquently, a little further from that, you've spoken eloquently about the role of Taiwan as a model for the development of diplomacy, or the development of democracy in the mainland, and how Taiwan is, in fact, a better model than Europeans or Americans can be in that. I'm wondering what then is the appropriate and useful role for the U.S. and the U.S. government in urging the mainland Chinese toward democracy.
Okay. I had a chat with the National Endowment for Democracy one time over lunch in Washington. And I know that you are doing great things in trying to urge the PRC holding elections. Now they have elections on the village level, right? Everybody knows. I said, yes, that's a great job. Holding elections gradually at all levels in ascending order. But I also told my guests that it's equally important. It's equally important to be truthfully democratic. It's equally important to have two equalities. The equality to receive, complete equality to receive education, which they have now. They have revived the college entrance exam for university colleges after the Cultural Revolution. That exam was suspended during the Cultural Revolution. For many years, students were admitted on the so-called red list whether you are ideologically fit and not whether academically fit. But since the founding of the PRC in 1949, they have not revived the millennium tradition of government service exam. Now, in a free and democratic society, every citizen ought to have this equality to enter government service, either through elections or through government service exam. So I told my guests at National Endowment for Democracy that maybe some other organization, not you are obsessed with elections, but some other organization in the United States should tell them that it's important to revive the civil service exam in mainland China. That's a fundamental thing to democratize the society. Did I answer your question?
Yes,
thank you. Oh, excuse me. Yes, please.
Hi, Representative Chen. It's really been an honor to hear you speak to us today. My name is Yuhan Chang. I'm the co-president of the Harvard-Radcliffe Taiwanese Cultural Society, which is an undergraduate organization at Harvard. My question relates to your second point, which is about Taiwan's desire to gain further international recognition. And as you pointed out, I think it's safe to say that all Taiwanese and Taiwanese Americans would like to see Taiwan gain a greater recognition in the international arena and play a more active role in international affairs. As you're also saying, I think a lot of Taiwanese Americans still feel a very tight connection to their homeland. And we like to, even second generation Taiwanese Americans like myself, I was actually born in Taiwan and moved here when I was 3. But we would like to, see Taiwan gain a greater role in international affairs. And there's a lot of young Taiwanese Americans here today, so I was wondering if you had any words of advice or inspiration for what we can do to further this noble cause, I guess.
Okay. It's a tough question. But I thank you for your patriotism and your enthusiasm to help. I think in a free society, in a democratic society, everyone is entitled to his opinion. You can write letters to the editor. You can write to your congressman to voice your opinion. You can talk to groups like the service clubs. Sometimes they need speakers badly, So I think there are many ways to let your views be known if you have a desire. Did that answer your question? Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Judith Vecchione. I am a producer at WGBH, which is public television here in Boston. And I am the producer of an upcoming documentary special on the history of Taiwan. It's called Tug of War, and it will air on November 30th on most PBS stations. And it's very fortunate for me to be here today because over the next weeks I'll be talking to press people about the documentary and the questions that it raises, and I expect that I will get questions along the lines of what do you think are the danger points for Taiwan coming up? What are the signals, the problems that could be coming in the next years, excuse me. What are the possible provocations on either side of the strait that could cause more trouble? And I would be very grateful for some help with answers.
Thank you. As long as Taiwan does not declare de jure independence as quote-unquote Republic of Taiwan, then nothing will be considered directly provocative in the view of the PRC, or as they have said so. Now, the danger is they have said repeatedly and publicly that they are going to use force if Taiwan declares de jure independence. So why should we provoke them unnecessarily? So I think the more prudent approach is the government approach or ruling party's approach. That is, we build the Republic of China and Taiwan more free, more democratic, more prosperous. We serve as a role model. We wait until the other side to be equally free, equally democratic, equally prosperous. Then unification will come naturally. We don't have to provoke them. Now, the other dangerous was from the other side, to use force. Would they use force if unprovoked? That is a big question. So that is why we have been asking that they renounce the use of force, that they remain committed to the peaceful resolution of the Taiwan Strait issue. Nowadays, as we approach the 21st century, I don't think sensible people still think that force can solve problems. I don't think so. But just imagine what would happen if the mainland would use force unprovoked. Okay? I could almost visualize what would happen. Of course, our economy would be totally destroyed, totally, because we depend on trade. If our trade is affected, our economy will collapse, and we would totally destroyed. But think of the other side. Would they be affected? Definitely, definitely. Please do not think that we are totally defenseless. We have spent a large portion of budget for nothing, for a credible defense, and they know that. We don't have capacity to destroy the whole continent, and we don't have to. But their cream, the cream of their economy will be destroyed. And that would push the Chinese nation, the whole Chinese nation, back to the 19th century. So while we see other nations march toward the 21st century, we'll be back to the 19th century, 2 centuries behind. Now there is a real possibility today that we can catch up with even the most advanced nation in this world, the most advanced technology in this world in another generation, at most 30 years, if both sides remain peaceful, remain cooperative, even competing, we could reach that goal. But I just cannot imagine what the picture would look like that China is pushed back to the 19th century. Will not only be behind US, England, Japan, Germany, France, Italy, Spain, Portugal, will be behind even Pakistan and Bangladesh. That is dreadful. I think we Chinese are smart enough. We know that we should avoid a warfare in the resolution of our own problem. I don't know whether I have answered your question.
Almost. I just want to maybe follow it up a little bit, which is, it seems to me that the last time there was a crisis, a few years ago, what was
2 years ago, 1996.
What was provocative, or said to be provocative, was not the declaration of any form of independence, but smaller steps, a visit in this country, a push to be readmitted into the United Nations. Those kinds of actions come, it seems to me, from the groundswell of democracy that Taiwan is so justifiably proud of. Do you have any sense that that is another danger?
Yes, that is really a danger. But they did not intend to attack. Let's be honest with ourselves. They intend to intimidate, to blackmail. They said they would launch missiles in 2 restricted areas outside of the 2 major ports of Taiwan. Now, if they had intended to attack, would they announce beforehand? So there was just efforts, sinister efforts, of course, to influence the election result of our presidential election. And the reason was not the provocation I mentioned. The reason was the perceived step taken by President Lee towards so-called independence. But if you read again his speech or his lecture at Cornell, his alma mater, he mentioned Republic of China 16 times. 16 times. He said the same thing as I said today. Is that provocative? No. So our appeal to the United States is to engage in parallel engagement with both sides of China to see that hostilities will not flare up, or even this test firing of missiles will never happen again. I think all of us have a responsibility to maintain peace and stability, but we cannot control the communists. I only hope they are sensible, but sometimes they are not. Yes.
Good evening, Ambassador Chen. My name is Michael Chang, and I'm with the undergraduate college here at Harvard University. First of all, I'd like to thank you for taking your time to come speak with us. It's certainly been very informative for me, and I'm sure for a lot of other people as well. In your speech, you have called for a greater involvement of Taiwan in international politics, or the sphere of international politics. But at the same time, you have been careful to point out that Taiwan is largely separate from China in economic spheres, for example. Now, supposing, and you have also made it very clear that unlike certain people in the Democratic Progressive Party, for example, your government does not necessarily support the idea of a completely independent Taiwan from the Chinese mainland government. My question then is, with the, if what you call for, this greater involvement into international politics among organizations such as the UN, for example, comes about, then Taiwan would be practically, if not officially, a separate entity from the Chinese mainland. And how do you think that that would be different from independence?
Very good, very good. So we have been asking the United Nations General Assembly to reconsider the resolution 2758 adopted in 1971. That resolution seated the PRC representatives as representative of China and unseated the representative of ROC as representative of China. Now, in that year, 1971, I think the world as a whole believed that the days of the Republic of China were numbered, that the course of history, the natural course of history, will take care of the Republic of China, that the PRC would somehow annex Taiwan, and then what we are discussing today would be academic. But the reality is that it didn't happen. The Republic of China on Taiwan today is not only a reality, it is a free and democratic nation. And it's not only free and democratic, it is a prosperous nation. Instead of receiving aid from the United States, as in the early years, we have our own aid program in Asia, in Africa, and in Latin America. Now, that resolution resolved the problem of the non-representation of 1.2 billion people in the UN. Yes, I admit that. But what about these 22 million people? It didn't address that issue. As I said, maybe it thought it wasn't necessary. But now it is necessary to look again. But there are so many mini states in the UN with territories much smaller than us, with population much smaller than us, and they are represented. That's number one. Number two, before the German unification, there were 2 German seats in the UN, and that did not impede the eventual unification of the country. And there are 2 Korean seats in the UN, and I'm sure will not impede the eventual unification of Korea. That is why we want the United Nations to reconsider that resolution 2758 adopted by the UN. We're not asking the unseating of PRC and expel them from the UN. That's not our purpose.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much.
Representative Chun, maybe we'll take 1 or 2 more questions for reasons of time. This young woman is patiently waiting.
Thanks. Just a quick question. I was glad to hear what you said about how committed the Taiwanese government is to democracy. And I was wondering when you were planning on holding a referendum to ask the people of Taiwan whether they wanted to reunify or whether they wanted independence.
Very good. In a democracy, you act according to the Constitution. Okay? You're a citizen, I suppose. Are you? Very good.
I'm a former resident of Taiwan as well.
Okay. Would you advocate in the United States that the U.S. should hold a referendum to decide whether to give up all your land to the native Indians because they were once masters of this nation?
Absolutely.
You would?
Yeah.
Okay, then forget about that question. Would you hold a referendum? I'm going to rephrase the question. Would you hold a referendum to form a union with Canada?
If there were any of a groundswell of democracy in our country to have a union with Canada, as there is in Taiwan, then yeah.
Well, but according to our Constitution, we have ways, legal ways, constitutional ways to revise the Constitution. It requires 3/4 of the National Assemblymen to revise the Constitution. The Constitution says it is the Constitution of the Republic of China. And we don't have a law or constitutional provision governing the holding of referendum on such matters as unification or referendum. We believe it is our sacred duty to remain part of that historical, cultural, geographical China. But mind you, I never said to be part of the PRC. In fact, we believe communism in China is a passing phase, to quote John Foster Dulles. Now, if communism in other countries, including the motherland of communism, has collapsed, it is logical to infer that communism will last forever in China? Not. In fact, they are now changing in their economic system. That means they have admitted at least the economic system doesn't work under communism. And that's good. We say, good luck to you. We wish you success. And with economic development, people are going to ask for more freedom and more democracy in the future. So we should be patient. I explained the reasons why we want to be part of China and to see unification of China and the freedom and democracy. And it is unnecessary provocation to declare de jure independence. Okay, thank you.
Take one last question, and perhaps Representative Chun can speak informally to people after.
After you, I'll give him the chance because he's been standing there. Okay, please.
I'm glad the conversation's turned back to democracy. I'm a second-year policy student here at the Kennedy School, and I wanted to ask you, Taiwan has done an incredible job in engaging the international arenas I don't think anybody in this room would doubt, at least, that Taiwan has done an incredible job in engaging the international arena's imagination, the fact that they've democratized. There have been elections, there's been a lot of press about them, but I was wondering if you could offer any suggestions or any insight into what the government could better do to engage its own population and citizenry in the spirit of democracy.
Engage the citizenry for what?
To deepen the sense of democracy and sense of what democracy is about amongst the Taiwanese population.
Well, we are a young democracy. I know you are referring to the fistfights in our parliament, but there are now fewer fistfights. Let's be candid. Let's be fair to everyone involved. And do not forget, I'm a student of the U.S. government too. Do not forget that in the early days in the U.S. Congress, there were fights too. There were even gunfights. You're too young to know. Are you a student of government? No.
Yes,
you are? Then check your textbook. So I'm optimistic. As we are a young democracy, we have problems. But as I said, we have two other ingredients that many other countries don't have. There's complete equality to receive education and complete equality to enter government service.
Perhaps the ambassador misunderstood my question. My question was much more towards how the government can increase the citizenry's faith in the government. It was more addressed towards the corruption within the government.
Now you mentioned corruption. Okay. I cannot say that there's no corruption, but I can say that in the high echelons of government, the government is basically clean. As there is an objective study by institutes in foreign land giving us a rather fair rating in the integrity and clean government. We're not among the top. In Singapore has always been rated number one. Now, the reason is very simple. Singapore has given the officials exorbitant salaries, much higher, 10 times higher than U.S. officials. And then, on the other hand, they would indict and convict corrupt officials. Therefore, people in the government know better how to behave, to avoid all scandals, to avoid all signs, even perception of corruption. That's how they achieved. I think that's a good model for us. We should reduce the bureaucracy and increase the salary. I'm not complaining about my salary. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Chen, thank you very much for addressing these questions and for accommodating my question. I was wondering if you could speak to the cultural factors that might influence the Taiwan Straits tensions. Specifically, you've reiterated that the cultural affinity between Taiwan and mainland China will eventually result in the reunification, and actually Professor Sam Huntington here at Harvard has agreed with that. But when I was in Taiwan this past year, I noticed that a lot of Taiwanese will actually distinguish themselves as being Taiwanese, and that being their ethnic identity. And as we can see around the world, a question of ethnic identity often causes much strife and or violence. And while none of us want to see that occur, how would you address this issue, especially with the Democratic Progressive Party just recently gaining the majority in the provincial governments around the island, and now with the mayoral seat in Taipei up for grabs soon, and then the presidency? How would you address, although the DPP has stepped back from its line of independence, it still identifies itself with being Taiwanese. Taiwanese is now being spoken in the schools, and there's a push to rewrite the history books, especially with regards to the 228 incident.
Thank you. How much do you know about the Taiwanese dialect? Do you know anything about it?
I don't know Taiwanese. I was studying Mandarin.
You speak Mandarin?
一点点。
一点点。Do you know anything about the written Chinese language?
Yes.
一点点 also.
一点点。
Anyway, I want to tell this audience that there's only one written Chinese language in the whole country, but there's thousands of dialects. Thousands of dialects. The main Taiwanese dialect, not only, the main, aside from the Hakka people, their Aborigines, the main Taiwanese dialect is identical with the dialect spoken in southern Hokkien on the mainland, because the ancestors came from Hokkien. Now, that fact alone does not justify that it's an ethnic group. Dialect alone. In fact, the language is the same. I'll give you one example. I don't want to, it's dinner time right now, detain you. First, the simple example is that the word for tea. Okay? Tea is written, there's no blackboard. Let me write. I want to get to this. This is the character for tea, and it's pronounced cha in Mandarin, and in the rest of the country, cha. But in southern Hokkien province and Taiwan, it's pronounced de. So the Spaniards came to Quanzhou, the biggest port in the Ming Dynasty, and bought tea, and they thought the word was de. So they exported de to France as de, to England as tea. But the rest of the world know only cha or chai, because they bought the product from north of southern Hokkien. But whether it's cha or chai or de or tea, is the same character. Isn't that beautiful? You speak differently, but you write the same way. So before the introduction of Mandarin as a lingua franca, sometimes the Chinese people had to write in order to communicate. But the introduction of lingua franca, Mandarin, everybody speaks Mandarin in addition to the dialect. Modesty aside, I speak 6 dialects, but I don't belong to 6 ethnic groups. I'm Chinese. Okay, now, I don't deny that there are people think they are a different ethnic group, but indeed they are not. Culturally, historically, language-wise, they are not an ethnic group. But yes, I know that people have a right to to want to be a separate country, but do they represent a majority? So in a democracy, what do you do? You go to elections. You elect your representatives. You elect assemblymen of National Assembly, which has a right to revise the Constitution. But you just don't do it in a violent way or stage a revolution every time you want to be separate country. So that's my answer. I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you. Thank you. Representative Chun, thank you very much.